Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something a little unusual. We've got a song and a chatbot conversation about a Bible verse, Zechariah 8.19 to be exact, and even a bit of Michael Jackson.
Wow, sounds a little all over the place, huh?
It does a bit, right?
Yeah.
But stick with us. It all comes together in a really interesting look at faith and hope and a longing for peace that we all have.
You know, it's funny. You send over all these different sources, right? And it was that chatbot conversation about Zechariah, that 8.19, that really jumped out as the core of this whole deep dive. It kind of brings all the other sources together.
Interesting. Yeah, well, you started with the song Be All Right, which is about keeping the faith during tough times.
Yeah.
But there's a really cool detail in the lyrics. They actually switch back and forth between English and Spanish.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That multilingual thing really makes the song's message a lot bigger. You know, it's like a universal hope that todo va estar bien, that everything will be all right no matter who you are or where you come from.
And there's that image, God holding the world in his hands, really powerful, almost like a visual of the hope in the song. And speaking of hope, that brings us right into that chatbot conversation you had about Zechariah 8.19, right?
Yeah, you asked the chatbot specifically about what that verse means, and that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
So there are two main ways people translate Zechariah 8.19. One way emphasizes the coming days of the Lord, you know, which can have that kind of triumphant, maybe even apocalyptic feel.
Right, I see. And the other translation is about loving truth and peace. So two pretty different takes on the same verse. Which one kind of resonated with you?
Well, that's the cool thing about this whole deep dive, right? It's all about your own personal journey through this material. But the important thing is the chatbot took both translations and connected them to this idea of growing as a person, of pursuing truth and peace in your everyday life.
So it's not just some ancient prophecy that doesn't apply to us today, huh? It's got something to say to us right now. That's pretty cool.
Exactly. And then your questions took this really interesting turn. You started asking about modern-day Israel and Palestine, which, as you know, is a place with a long history of conflict.
Yeah, and I thought the chatbot did an amazing job with such a sensitive topic. You know, it gave this really clear and concise summary of the history, the different claims of both sides, and it didn't take any sides itself. It even talked about that Abrahamic connection both Jewish and Muslim people claim. It was really interesting.
Right, right. That's so key. It shows how deeply intertwined religion and culture are in that region. And it kind of helps us understand why peace has been so hard to find there.
Absolutely. And then the chatbot went on to discuss the UN partition plan, the establishment of Israel in 1948, and that whole ongoing conflict. And I even pointed out that, you know, despite Zechariah's hopeful prophecy, there aren't exactly kids dancing in the streets in that part of the world today.
Haha. Yeah, that's a sharp observation for sure. And the chatbot, it had a very nuanced and insightful response to that. It explained that these prophetic texts, they can be understood in both literal and symbolic ways, and that their fulfillment, it might take a very long time to play out.
Oh, I see. So we shouldn't necessarily expect to see like an overnight literal change.
Right. There's this concept of already but not yet when it comes to how we interpret prophecy. It's like the seeds of peace are planted, but they may need generations to fully grow.
Makes sense. And then things get even more complicated when you brought up Donald Trump's proposal to take over Gaza.
Right. You specifically asked the chatbot if a U.S. president could actually take land that's considered holy and promised to a chosen people. That question just hits right at the heart of that tension between political realities and theological beliefs.
And it's a question that probably doesn't have a simple answer, right?
Yeah.
And this leads us right to the big theme here, peace. You seemed really concerned about that, especially given the situation in the Middle East.
Yeah, you're right about that. The chatbot, it reflected that concern too. You know, it recognized how devastating war is and how badly we need peace. It even brought up Pax Romana, that period of relative peace during the Roman Empire. Lasted for what, like 2 centuries?
2 centuries of peace? Wow, that's pretty impressive. But I'm guessing it wasn't exactly world peace, right?
Haha, right. It's a good example of how even when you have peace, it's often limited in place and time. And it just highlights how challenging it is to achieve lasting peace, not just in one region, but for the whole world.
So are we just doomed to conflict forever? Is world peace just a naive dream?
Well, the chatbot acknowledged something pretty sobering. It said that throughout all of recorded history, there's never been a time when there wasn't a war happening somewhere in the world. But it also said that world peace, as hard as it is to achieve, is still a goal worth fighting for. There are so many people and groups working towards peace all over the world, trying to build bridges and create understanding.
And I know you mentioned Michael Jackson's song, Heal the World. That's where he comes in, right? I'm still trying to connect the dots.
Absolutely. That song is all about that deep longing for peace that you see throughout the chatbot conversation. It's about recognizing the brokenness of the world and coming together to make it better.
Okay, I'm starting to get it now.
Yeah.
But before we get to Michael Jackson, I think we need to take a step back and really talk about what peace actually means. Because, like you said before, it's not always as simple as it seems.
You're so right. We often think about peace as just like no more war, no more violence. But it's way more than that, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so.
True peace has got to be about justice, too, and equality. Even just respecting people, like basic human dignity.
Okay, so like a society could look peaceful on the outside, but underneath there could be all this injustice and inequality.
Exactly. And sometimes you actually need conflict to shake things up, to break down those harmful systems so you can actually make real change. So true. Like, think about the civil rights movement here in the U.S. All those protests, all that civil disobedience. It was confrontational, but it was so necessary to challenge that whole system of segregation and discrimination.
Exactly. That's such a good point. It's like saying you can't just ignore conflict or try to sweep it under the rug if you want real peace. Sometimes you got to face it head on to make things right.
Wow, conflict can actually be a force for good. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, it's a powerful idea, right? And it takes us right back to that chatbot conversation you were having and your questions about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The chatbot said it straight up, the history of peace efforts, there hasn't exactly been a success story.
Yeah, and it also brought up Donald Trump's idea about taking over Gaza, which just shows how complicated and sensitive this whole thing is.
Right. And it makes you ask, what are the things you really need to build lasting peace, not just in the Middle East, but everywhere?
Wanting empathy is a big part of it, right? Being able to see things from the other side's point of view, even if you don't agree with them. Absolutely. Empathy lets you connect with people on a human level, even people you might see as your enemies. It helps you see them as people with their own hopes and fears and dreams, not just as some faceless enemy.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But how do you actually build empathy, especially when there's been so much hurt and pain and history between people? It can't be easy to feel empathy for people who have hurt you or the people you love.
It's definitely not easy. It takes a lot of courage to step outside your own bubble, to really try and see the world through the eyes of someone who's been hurt or marginalized.
Yeah, it takes courage, especially when those perspectives challenge your own beliefs and values.
It does, but if we're not willing to do that, to engage with different points of view, to really listen with an open heart and an open mind, then I don't think we'll ever find true peace.
So empathy is key,
But
but is it enough? What else do we need for a more peaceful world?
we need to talk to each other. That's huge. Real, honest, open communication where everyone feels safe to share what they think and what they're afraid of and what they hope for. We need spaces where people can listen without judging, where they can ask questions without feeling attacked. Places where we can actually start building bridges and understanding each other.
But for that to happen, you need trust, right? And trust is usually the first thing to go when there's conflict.
You're right. Trust is a fragile thing and it takes work to build. It takes consistency, being honest and transparent in everything you do, showing people that you're really there to listen and learn.
So we've got empathy, we've got dialogue, we've got trust. What else?
And all of that needs to be backed up by action. Talking about peace isn't enough. We have to actually do something about it. We have to tackle the root causes of conflict, like poverty and inequality and injustice.
Right, we can't just cover up the symptoms, we have to deal with the disease itself.
Exactly. It's about building systems that are fair and equal and sustainable. It's about investing in education and healthcare and making sure everyone has a chance to succeed. It's about creating a world where everyone feels valued and respected and like they have a voice.
That sounds amazing. But where do we even start? It feels kind of overwhelming.
It can be, but even small things can make a difference. It starts with each of us making a choice to be more peaceful in our own lives, in the way we treat each other, in the decisions we make every day.
So it's not just about big speeches and peace treaties. It's about the little things we do, the way we treat each other, how we interact with the world.
You got it. Peace isn't something that just happens. It's something you actively work towards. It's a journey, not a destination. And it's a journey we're all on together.
Okay, but how does this connect to heal the world? I'm still not quite there.
Remember that line about making the world a better place for our children and their children? That's a call to action right there. It's about getting involved in this whole project of peace building.
So it's not just a nice song. It's about actually taking responsibility for making the world a more peaceful place.
Exactly. And that's where personal transformation comes in. If we want peace out there in the world, we need to start cultivating it within ourselves.
You mean like inner peace?
You got it. Finding that sense of calm and balance even when everything around you is crazy. And it's not about being passive or ignoring the problems. It's about finding the strength and resilience to face those problems with compassion and clarity and a commitment to making things better.
So like that saying, be the change you want to see in the world. It all starts with us.
It does, and it keeps going with us. Peace is a continuous effort. It takes sustained commitment from individuals, communities, nations, everyone.
This deep dive has been incredible so far.
Yeah.
We've gone from a song about faith and hope to talking about what peace really means and how hard it is to achieve. And we even managed to bring in Michael Jackson.
It's amazing, isn't it, how these totally different things can come together to shed light on such big and important ideas?
Well, before we wrap things up, I have one last question.
Yeah.
You mentioned that peace can have a downside. Can you explain that a bit more? I'm still having trouble understanding how peace could be a bad thing.
Yeah, I know.
How can peace be a bad thing? But I guess you're right. There are like different angles to think about.
Yeah, the bottom line is this. Peace can't just be about stopping the fighting. It's got to be built on fairness, on equality, on making sure everyone's rights are respected. Otherwise, you just end up with things looking peaceful on the surface, but underneath it all, there's a ton of oppression and injustice.
No, I see. So you could have a society where people are too afraid to speak up against what's wrong, even if it means living in fear all the time. That's not really peace, is it?
No, not at all. And that brings us to another tricky thing. Sometimes you actually need conflict to break down those systems of oppression and make real lasting change. Think about those peaceful protests during the civil rights movement. They shook things up and forced people to face the reality of racism.
Wow. So conflict can actually be a good thing sometimes. It's a pretty deep thought.
It is. Of course, nobody wants violence or fighting, but sometimes it's a necessary part of changing things for the better.
Okay, so peace is about way more than just stopping the fighting. It's about creating a society where everyone is treated fairly and included.
Exactly. And that ties back to our talk about Zechariah 8.19, that whole idea of loving truth and peace. It's not enough to just want peace. You have to fight for truth and justice, too.
I like that. Real peace has to have all of those things: truth, justice, and the well-being of everyone. It can't just be about the absence of conflict.
Right on. And that brings us full circle to your deep dive mission. You started out wanting to understand how faith, current events, and this longing for peace all fit together. And we've been exploring those themes through that song, your chatbot conversation, and even Michael Jackson.
It's been quite the journey. We've really dug into what peace means, challenged our own ideas, and found connections in places we wouldn't expect.
All because you asked great questions and followed your curiosity.
So what does this all mean for me, the listener? What's the takeaway from all of this?
Here's the big one. Peace isn't something that just happens. You have to work for it, both as individuals and as a society. And it starts with each of us trying to be more peaceful in our own lives, in how we treat others, and in the choices we make every day.
So it's not just about big speeches and treaties. It's about the little things we do each day.
You got it. It's about choosing kindness over anger, empathy over judgment, understanding over ignorance. It's about being open to listening to people who see things differently, to bridge those gaps, and to work together for a world where everyone can live in peace and dignity.
And what about Zechariah's prophecy? Do you think that future he saw, that world full of truth and peace, is it even possible?
Well, that's a question you have to answer for yourself. But even when things seem impossible, I think hope is so important. And maybe by living out those principles we talked about today, empathy, dialogue, action, and a real commitment to truth and justice, we can create a world that reflects what Zechariah was talking about.
I feel inspired after this deep dive, but also kind of overwhelmed. There's a lot to take in.
I hear you. But remember, you don't have to do everything at once. Just take one small step today. Maybe talk to someone you disagree with. Really listen to their point of view. Or do something kind for a stranger. Or just think about how you can be a more peaceful person in your own life.
And maybe put on some Michael Jackson while you're at it.
Exactly. Music can be a powerful reminder that we're all connected and that we all want a better world.
Well, that about wraps up this deep dive. But the exploration doesn't have to stop here. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep working towards a world where peace isn't just a dream, but a reality.
Until next time, keep on diving.